being comfortable with being uncomfortable, that we cannot control everything. Be comfortable that sometimes employees will not stay on the corporate messaging. And is that bad? Not necessarily, because the marketing messages, they represent the brand, but sometimes they are boring. Employees, maybe they are able to better convey the message and the essence of it rather than staying on branded messages. An understanding of social. It's not just channels. Social media is so much more. And our employees have that power to support the business, but also to share their experience and how their brand also builds the companies. So I think it's really the new type of leadership that is really required to embrace social instead of trying to control it.
Welcome back to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast, the unique podcast series that flips the marketing conversation from external to internal, where we talk about everything you need to know about how to build a brand and drive growth by engaging and empowering your company's most powerful advocates, your very own employees. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I have another interesting discussion lined up for you. And this is another case story episode, as I like to call it, where we highlight the stories of companies who are doing internal marketing and/or employee advocacy very well. And in the spotlight for this episode, we'll be learning about Ericsson and how it executes its own employee advocacy program. So, there's going to be tons of great takeaways, and you won't want to miss a minute. But first, remember that leveraging the personal brands of your employees through a well-built employee advocacy program doesn't just happen overnight. It means that you need to be creating a stream of positive, engaging content to get them bought in and to encourage them to start sharing it. The best place to create that content is with Workshop. It's an internal marketing platform for creating beautifully branded, employee-specific campaigns. It replaces any internal email tool you have and integrates with the other communication channels that your team uses the most, including Slack, SharePoint, and Microsoft Teams. So head on over to useworkshop.com/marketing to learn more and download their complete guide to building an employee advocacy program for your company. And of course, Workshop is my Season 2 sponsor, so thank you, Workshop. Happy to have you on board. Now, without further ado, let's dive right into the conversation. And I'm very, very excited to introduce to you another awesome guest. As I say, every single time, all my guests are awesome. And why I'm particularly excited, though, about this episode is that it's a special case story episode. We've done a couple in the past. And what I like to talk about when I say case stories is the opportunity that we get on this podcast to talk to folks who are representatives from companies who are doing internal marketing and/or employee advocacy very well. Because most of our conversations tend to trend on the side of theory and hypothesis and experience and expertise and insight. But whenever we get the chance to have a conversation with the individuals on the ground in the companies who are actually executing and doing it very well, I think there's a unique opportunity for all of us to learn what's working and what's not working with them in a very practical way so that we could perhaps take some lessons learned ourselves. And my guest today is Anita Veszeli. I think I got the pronunciation correct.
You did.
Thank you, Anita. Welcome. Anita is the Director of Social Media and Advocacy with Ericsson. And Anita, I'm so very excited to have you for this very special conversation. Tell me, where are you joining us from? Where are you right now?
Thank you so much, Kerry. And I'm super excited as well because we have got to know each other through LinkedIn. And this is the first time when we actually speak to each other and when we see each other. So I'm super, super excited and thank you for having me. So I'm joining from Sweden, where in the background you can see it's winter, so it's dark. But I'm pretty sure that you and me just going to shine through that darkness and have a really great conversation.
I'm sure we will. And I will not mention again that I'm in sunny Jamaica right now. I'm so sorry. But we did speak and we said, you know what? You need to put Jamaica on your bucket list if it's not there already. I'm sure it is. And who
It
knows?
is.
Maybe we can have some jerk chicken in person in the future on the beach. I think that would be great.
I would love that.
Oh, it would be wonderful. Thank you so much again for joining us. So let's jump right into it because I'm excited and I'm sure our listeners are excited as well to hear the Ericsson story about their journey on this path of employee advocacy. But could you start out by telling us what are the marketing objectives of Ericsson and why did they even explore this thing called employee advocacy in the first place?
Absolutely. And I think it's most people who actually heard about the brand name, they still think it about the mobile phones. And that's where Ericsson was really known as a B2C brand. And once they discontinued the mobile phones, pretty much the brand name just disappeared from the B2C conversations or people. And so Ericsson is the supplier of the major telecom or communication service providers. I think it was the 40th anniversary of the first mobile network just in October, which was with Telia and Ericsson. And now we have the 2G, 3G, 4G, and now the 5G. So the technology behind it, the hardware that we can have mobile conversations and mobile coverage, which is super important. That's behind the scenes. And we work with the communication service providers. So it's a B2B company and a brand. And of course, we have hardware, software. We also have IoT solutions, factory automation for the future of cities, transportation. But it's really less known because I think also in our communication or the marketing objective is really to drive business and be part of the conversation. However, at the same time, sustainability and corporate responsibility is also our core values. And it's not just because it's trendy now, but it has been there from the very beginning. And that's when we would also like to be part of the conversations more in a wider space than just like in the B2B and telecom.
I'm glad you made that distinction, Anita, because as a or consumer myself, you're right. My only exposure to Ericsson would have just been, again, through the mobile phone experience. And so it's great to have that clarification about the fact that you guys are into so much more than that now, and particularly in the B2B space. And I think that's an important point to note because again, going back to the question about why you explored employee advocacy in the first place, am I to then deduce that for you, it was more so in alignment to support your B2B strategy only? Or did you see B2C benefit at any point? Or it purely came out of that B2B thrust?
I think it was a wider part of the strategy. We actually started our journey 9 years ago with employee advocacy. So that's when I was working in one of the business areas of Ericsson. At that time, it was called Global Services. So that was the services part of the company. And we didn't have any social media, not really content strategy within that business area. And that's when I started my role was integrated marketing, but I was passionate already about social media. So we opened up the branded account for that specific business area and how we can communicate with our customers, but also be part of other discussions. And that's when I already started to say that it really is time consuming. It's a lot of effort, budget, content creation that needs to go into a branded account to really have followers, to have that conversation. And that's when I pitched and started a pilot for employee advocacy, because for that business area, we had 50,000 employees. So imagine that, obviously not everyone is going to be active on social, but even if it's just like the 10% of them, what is the impact that we can create? And what I also saw that, of course, people were on social media, some of them more and some not. There was like also a huge age gap between. And that's when we also had some conversations that are either like leaking information, misproper sharing of images. The 20-year-olds were not necessarily making a distinction that it's not my dinner, but it's like a sensitive information and what to share. And managers or line managers are like, no, we need to control everything and we can shut down social media. Okay, let's take a step back and let's see that what we can do together and how we can enable and work with those managers that even though that on the computer, for example, you can ban social media, but everyone has the phone. So you cannot really do that. And just coming from a post-socialist country, whenever you are super controlled, you always try to sneak out of that control. So why don't we change that conversation and really have, as managers, discussions with our teams that what is okay, what is not okay, simple use. And why should they think about it? Why their brand matters, even if it's early career and they would like to develop their career or use social media for learning. What are the different opportunities? So this is where really started. And thank you for reminding me of that. I mean, I totally forgot about it. It was 9 years ago, and that's why we started.
That is 9 years is a long time, I think, certainly for an employee advocacy conversation, because I don't know how much of employee advocacy was even a thing 9 years ago. So for a company to have that kind of vision and foresight to think that this is something that really could be beneficial, I think is amazing. Could you give us an indication of the kinds of successes that Ericsson has enjoyed to date since you've been doing this for as long as you have been?
Absolutely. And before I get to the success, I think it's important to see that how we also evolved and how I define employee advocacy. Some people think that employee advocacy is just about the branded content, that employees join, they push the button, everyone has the same advertisement and the B2B marketing robot or whatever, or advertisement spaces. Employees are not channels. And that's when it's easy for them to get started. But how do they evolve? And how can they also build their brand, how they can become thought leaders? So we have an employee advocacy tool in place for employees who would just like to get started. It's also a combination of branded content and third party. But we also have specific programs for our executive leadership team, executives, our experts. Who are the experts around 5G or cloud, around sustainability? How can we help them to get started and start to create content that is not just necessarily on the brand? We have a sales program for social selling. And now we are also looking into talent acquisition, that how that team or function can really use social media to reach their objectives. And I mean, in a general success, we can see that through our advocacy efforts, it's the best way to drive traffic for our .com pages. It outperforms organic paid or any other efforts. So it's quite a clear vision to show. It's also really interesting, or some of the successes, and sometimes it's just like small success that we are celebrating, is what are the key conversations that the brand wants to be part of, either through branded accounts or through employees. And there are those influencer network maps when you can really say that this is where we are being part of that, and also with the influencer community or the discussions. And whenever someone is questioning the advocacy part or how to work with external experts and really merging the two, employee advocacy and influencer marketing efforts, I can show that, okay, look, this is the conversation that we want to be part of, and we are not. These are the key people from other brands or competitors. So let's give it a try and come back to it like 3 months, 6 months. And it's super clear that we can see that effort. So those are some of the super simple ways to also show it to executives.
Fascinating. And I love that you mentioned the fact that, and we knew this for those of us who have been part of this conversation long enough, how rich of a contribution employee advocacy makes to your brand building efforts, particularly when you talk about the fact that it's more effective than paid social. You're a part of conversations. You're certainly able to be a part of conversations in a way that you probably otherwise wouldn't if you're just purely having the conversation from the company page or even influencer perspective. I guess the other thing that I loved about what you shared, Anita, is the fact that there are some people who just are very comfortable sharing company branded content that's available to be shared, and that's fine. And there are also employees, though, who are far more intent on doing things on their own, in the sense that they want to create valuable content themselves that they want to share. And whatever the motivation for that is, it probably could be because they're just fascinated by it. But I really believe there are some employees who are far more passionate about building their own personal brands. And by doing that, especially on social, it starts with creating valuable content on a very routine basis. building a following and adding value to that following. So I'm getting from you that you're comfortable with the either approach, is what I'm hearing. If that is the case, and I think that's great, a lot of people would love to hear that. Can you say if you can give us an indication of how successful that sort of approach has been for employees to build their own personal brands? And I'm sure that Ericsson seems comfortable with that, but if you could clarify, because I think that's the nervousness around this whole thing of employee advocacy. A lot of companies would rather control the content because they don't want good employees to be poached, but also they want to have that control over what is said. But if you are an organization who is encouraging that kind of an organic content creation from employees and supporting them building their personal brands, I think that's a great story to share. So could you share your view on that and how it has been impacting employee personal brand building efforts, and how do you control that, I guess?
Absolutely. And I think that's also like a maturity that at the beginning, when you start, you really want something that is controlled. And this is the message, and this is what you can share. This is okay. This is not okay. We also need to see that how social is changing, the behavior. It has been continuously evolving, but I think in the last 2 years, everything went on social. We are still not able to, or like in some countries that are opening up, we are able to meet face to face, but the pandemic is still there. There are countries where it's still curfews and the situation is not good. So we can have these conversations. And I think, at least for me, the right approach is that what type of internal personas or employees do I have? What could be their motivation? What is also the company culture? So if in a company, support the growth mindset that you want employees to continuously learn, social media can be a really great platform. I mean, I learn a lot from you and from others, how you approach your employee advocacy, what your viewpoints are. And sometimes I just get inspired because I didn't think about it. So I think extending our thinking, not just within our teams and just really talking about, okay, diversity and one way of thinking, but I think that community on social is a really great way to learn and develop. It's another thing that it can come with it, the thought leadership piece or content creators. We also see that as a trend. Our employees are not different than any other normal person, right? So if we see that's a trend, that there are more and more content creators and we want to create something, we have seen that the youth on YouTube or TikTok, our employees are also youth and others. So we cannot make a distinction that you join this company and you need to forget about who you are and what you want and only work for us. So I think it's really that employee engagement or employee experience and helping them, that what is good, giving some tips to them, investing in their learning, that, okay, you want to do something or you want to understand social media a little bit better. Here are some master classes. This is some type of a coaching you can get or e-learning modules. I think this approach is so much better for the culture, for employees, and also ultimately we see that there are trends that companies whose executive leadership is active on social media, they outperform the ones that are not. And there are tons of them. I mean, the Edelman Trust Barometer continuously shows that brands, governments, media are less and less trusted, and people trust people. So it's really empowering that power. And I think this approach worked really well for us. So that's what I really believe in.
I am so cognizant of the fact that you mentioned maturity, because it really is a journey where companies, yes, they hear about this awesome thing called employee advocacy. They appreciate the benefits of it. I'm glad you mentioned companies that have executives on social media doing so very, very well. So intellectually, I think it's easy for a company to buy into that. But to really now reach a stage like Ericsson, where after many years of saying, well, we're comfortable to give that leeway, to give that permission, as it were, for employees to be able to generate that value added content. And it is a journey. And I think as companies adopt and move through the phases of rolling it out and embedding it into their culture, I think there's great possibility there. I'd love to take a little step back, because we've been talking, yes, a lot about employee advocacy and ultimately, in the internal marketing conversation, the ultimate objective of internal marketing is to encourage employee advocacy. It's engaging employees first in the mission, the vision, the purpose of the company, and empowering them to be able to deliver on the brand promise. But there's also an empowerment perspective that lends itself to, well, how are employees empowered to promote the brand using their own voices in their own networks, on their own social media accounts. And I'm suspecting that if Ericsson has been doing employee advocacy so well for so long, that your internal marketing game must be very strong and doing very well. And I'd love to know if you could give us a little bit of a peek inside Ericsson and tell us what your internal marketing, internal engagement is like, and what's that kind of a secret sauce that allows employee advocacy to really thrive and take root the way that it has.
Absolutely. And as I like to call it, social media is really the bridge between internal comms and external comms. And it's like a specific function. And we couldn't have done this without working really closely with our internal communication teams, with employee engagement, how they can communicate and how we work together. So I think it's also a really good collaboration. Can we do a better job? I think there's always something that you can do better. There are so many challenges with big organizations, people who have company computers, some of our field service engineers, they are not. How can you cater for the communication internally? So I think it's that partnership is super, super important. And it's also a journey for us because we learn a lot from them. Through them, we were also able to understand our internal employees or the different personas that we have. How can we also connect how we approach advocacy at Ericsson to our vision, mission, purpose, and the culture that all of our leaders are driving, and really putting together some of these puzzle pieces. As you know, that sometimes I would say that social is like a big jigsaw puzzle, and how to become a social first business or a social business. Each of these elements are really important. And I'm so happy that you pointed out, because I think many times companies really forget about that social is just like a channel, or employees are seen as channel. And it's really just external. But the amount of work and effort that needs to go in internally, driving that culture, that change, is really where the magic happens.
A quick sidebar question to that then, Anita. So the employee advocacy program is the center of excellence for that is in marketing, correct? Is my understanding correct? Just hearing you speak.
At Ericsson, the social media center of excellence is part of external communication.
Okay.
So not marketing. I have an oversight of, it depends. Yeah, in some companies, it's marketing. Sometimes it's rather external communication. And the wider organization is group function marketing and corporate relations. So ultimately, we are part of that. And it's me that sometimes I like to rebel. So, and I hope I'm going to say it in a right way, because I didn't think this one through. So bear with me, that I don't believe that social media is just or should be owned by just marketing or just internal comms. So I like to see or frame my role or the function of social media that it's really business function, and it supports PR, external comms, analyst relations, media relations, marketing campaigns, but it also supports sales. It should support talent attraction and really be embedded into each and every part of the organization. So for me, even though that I report to a manager that's in that function, how I look at it, where we need to be or go, is slightly different. So I'm not sure if it's confusing or not, but...
Oh, no, not at all. And where is internal comms resident then in Ericsson? Because you spoke about the partnership, I think, between the two functions.
Yes, they are also part of the group function marketing and corporate relations. So within that team, we have external communication and like analyst relations, media relations, and stakeholder management and social media sits there. Then we have employee communication, we have globally integrated marketing, and we also have our brand team. So those are like specific functions, but it's super important that all of us are working closely together.
Absolutely. And I always like to ask, because internal comms, I find where it's resident varies from company to company. In some companies, it's in HR. And in other companies, it's in marketing or under the same marketing umbrella. Well, that's fascinating. And I think we're getting into that part of the conversation where I'm sure a lot of our listeners are curious. Could you take us back, I guess, 9 years and maybe the first few years in and share with us very high level, because I don't want you to spill any company secrets, right? But very high level, the steps that Ericsson would have taken to implement employee advocacy and get it up and running at Ericsson.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share, because I think even though that sometimes you share the exact steps and someone would take that, it takes a lot of time, and it's just like maturity. As we discussed, it's a social transformation which doesn't really happen overnight. So where we started.
Social transformation. I'm sorry. I love that. I'm going to make a note of that one. It's a social transformation. I love that. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I love these nuggets. Always
No
make
worries.
my own notes. Thank you.
Absolutely. And actually right now, to become a social business by 2025, we are driving a social transformation. So we have a steering committee, we have working groups, and what needs to be in place and how do we drive that change, and how it also relates to the company's digital transformation overall. I think it's really quite rare. I haven't really heard about many other brands who have such a specific social transformation journey. But when we started 9 years ago, me and my good friend Jeepal, who is sitting in New Jersey, we have been talking. We worked in different areas then. And we teamed up making a business case. And at that time already, our employer brand team, also from the US, they were super interested. And we decided, or we took a look at that, what is the best way to set this up? How can we collaborate? Just that also to show to the business, even if it's a pilot, employee advocacy, that the more function we have, or the more areas we can show that how it can bring value to the company, it's easier to get the buy-in and easier also to scale if we have different stakeholders or drivers in this. So we did a long sourcing process, searching for the tool that what we would like to do, because obviously like through emails, we cannot really measure. And we also wanted to be compliant to the FTC regulations, because it not only regulates, for example, the external influencer community, but also how employees can advocate on behalf of the company. So just having a tool or using the hashtag Team Ericsson, we know that we are compliant, it's quite clear to everyone, and it's also easy to measure. So then we started our journey. And in a year, we came to a point where I really wanted it to become a global program. And that was the next hurdle that we really wanted to come through, because it was also at the same time when the company went through 2 to 3 different reorganizations. And we know that with a reorg, everyone is worried about their jobs and not necessarily about sharing content. And where should employee advocacy sit? And who's going to be the program manager? And who can do this? So we went through some rough patches. And I'm also open to share that there was a point when it was global, and many parts of that was just automated because there were not really anyone who was really taking care of it. And it was questioned internally that, it doesn't work. And that's when I had to be prepared that, okay, look, it really works for all of these companies. So employee advocacy works. Should we ask the question that why it doesn't work for us? And that's when I prepared the presentation that the best practice is really when you launch an employee advocacy program, it's not just a tool that you give to people, and you connect it to your branded accounts, and all the content will come in and they click and they share, they get fatigue. And it's not anything that it's really around them and what is good for them to share. And the first piece is also the training and enablement. So that's one of the pillars that if it's not there, then you will not be successful. The other one is really the internal communication, the community management around employees, educating, being in different meetings, advocating, really helping them through that way. And the internal personas, what is the content that really resonates with them? How can we cater for that? And the third one was really the measurement and success. So how can we plan that? How can we also look into the scaling plan? And I got 1 year to prove that, okay, let's do your 3 pillars and let's see, is it going to really work? And I was also fortunate that I could hire a program manager, because when I took over this role back in 2017, I already had this title, but the whole team was me, myself, and I. So it was quite challenging to do governance, social media security, listening, analytics, running the global Ericsson pages. And of course, some people didn't understand that what it is. So I had to take that initiative that, okay, how are we driving this? And my first hire to the team was an employee advocacy program manager. And when Gustav joined, fantastically, it started working. So we had the pillars in place. We had a person who is responsible, and we started to see amazing results. So those were the steps and some of the hurdles that we went through. So it hasn't been just a piece of cake for Ericsson either.
Well, first of all, I'm always happy when folks tell me that they get people resources to support the implementation of something. So I can only imagine that once you have a dedicated body, someone who's really focused on driving it, it can make all the difference. But I'm really also fascinated by how you outline this and compliance, I think, especially from a regulatory perspective. Obviously, every industry is different. But I do take the point about the FTC, making sure that everything that you're doing when put under the microscope or it can stand up to scrutiny is also something important to consider, because I don't think a lot of companies bear that in mind when they're talking about how are we empowering employees, especially if it's not just about pushing branded company content, but empowering them to generate content. Everybody needs to be on the same page with respect to what's required and what could potentially put us in breach, educate them, train them, and get going. I think that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so my next question then is, how have you been maintaining it all these years? And I guess how you've evolved, I think, would also be fascinating, because we keep mentioning maturity a couple of times. So I'm sure you would have gone through each of those phases. So how are you maintaining it and keeping the fire burning, as it were?
Absolutely. So we still have the program manager in place. We also built an employee advocacy community with the business areas and the market areas or local countries who can be the local drivers. They also understand the local objectives or content pillars a lot better. And we also have our internal agents, we call it the hub, and they are also supporting Gustav, or our program manager, with content creation, with approval of content, setting up different teams within our employee advocacy platform. And then he's also responsible for the training and education. So we always keep looking at that. What are the e-learning modules? And through the tool, we can also see that what is the behavior. So for colleagues who are who are not necessarily active, we suggest that, okay, you can take some of these e-learning modules in any of your free time. The ones who are networkers, how can you start to create content? How to grow your network? What is the really good behavior? How to reach out to influencers? So that's how we evolved. And sooner or later, we also seen that with our executives or subject matter experts or the sales teams or talent attraction, they are different functional areas where it's still advocacy, but they might need a different approach than just like the general employees. So that's when we created specific programs within our overall advocacy and creating sub-strategies that with executive social leadership, what are the key objectives that we would like to achieve? How can we take them through this journey? How can we cater for the support? Then for our sales teams, what do they also need? And just to make things even more complex at our company, we have two different types of sales teams. So one is the account manager with the buying committee and decision making, and they need a different social selling toolkit, how to work, than the ones who are really looking into prospecting. And talent attraction, that pipeline is something similar to the marketing pipeline, same but different, or the names are different. How can they also work and use social to the maximum benefit to achieve and attract the best talent? And we also see that hiring managers have a huge role in attracting talent. So one of my favorite examples, if I may say, that I was actually also surprised that I'm active on social media. I still don't have tons of followers, So it's just a little bit more than 1,000 on Twitter and a little bit over 2,000 on LinkedIn. So I'm still working on getting more network. But I created a short video when I was looking for a social media strategist. And I really wanted to experiment a little bit, that we think that LinkedIn is really working. But I also did the video on Twitter and also on Instagram. And on Twitter, it was amazing that some of the tech influencer communities really picked it up, or other social media influencers or influential people who really talk about social media. So it's not the Kardashians that really picked up my recruitment video. I just wanted to be clear on that one. And they really started to share. And, I have this person in mind. And my video got like more than 13,000 impressions. I was like, oh my God, I went viral. No, I didn't, but compared to myself. And one of the tech influencers recommended a person. And actually, Mordechai joined our company in November. So it was through social, and it was also super interesting to see for me that Twitter worked better than LinkedIn. And that was an experiment, at least for me, within this case. So advocacy and the programs and how we mature, I think some of these small successes are also super important to show internally. And this is how we also matured. And we have these specific programs. And then what I would like to take as a next step is that how can we connect the dots between these specific programs, that each of them have a strategy with specific KPIs, but then how do we connect the dots and really show the full impact of all of the programs, not just like individually.
Wow. What struck me about what you shared, Anita, is the fact that it's so, and this is my rephrasing of it. It's the different, I call it, streams that you have with their respective strategies for particular purposes and with particular objectives in mind. The executive leadership, thought leadership stream, as it were, and strategy to go with that. Then there's the employer branding for hiring. Then there is sales, different types of sales, and obviously general branding efforts. I think it's really fascinating. Could you share with us, what do you think, if you could pick maybe then one thing, or maybe two, if you can't narrow it down to one, but that one thing that you would say makes your employee advocacy successful at Ericsson?
It's our people. It's our employees. They make it successful. Without them, we wouldn't be able to, we could share and we can have all the tools and e-learning modules, but it's really them who make the difference.
I love that. We're nothing without our people, and it really has to start with having the right culture, the right enablement and empowerment to help them to be great. And I guess on the flip side, because sometimes it's always good to look at what we could have done differently, perhaps. What would you say is the biggest lesson or lessons you would have learned over the years about the program and how you've been running it and maintaining it? What's the biggest lesson or biggest lessons that you would have learned and are using to be better and do better at it?
For me, one of the biggest lessons was that to really be ahead of the curve, I already need to see that where we want to be in 5 years, and also cater for people who are still behind 5 years or 5 years behind, and how to bridge that gap. So by nature, I'm the visionary, and I had a really hard time explaining that this is what you can see at the other side of the forest, because people still couldn't see the first line of the forest. And that's something that I had to learn specifically, that how can I show some of the small successes, and how to do something small, show it internally, really do the communication, and not just with the employee communication, but also that internal marketing that you are really smartly advocating on, to show it to marketing teams, to show it to other teams, and keep advertising or marketing what you achieved, and really show them that, okay, this is what we did with such a small effort. Imagine the next steps. And each and every step could be small, but all those small steps will add up to something really big and impactful.
I love the fact that you mentioned it's so important for us to share the successes. It helps to drive buy-in and continuous engagement. Could you quickly share with us what are the things that you measure and track to gauge success of the program or not?
Absolutely. Within advocacy platform, we check how many people have been onboarded, how many downloaded the app or just used the desktop. We also measure the adoption rate overall the company, how active they are, if the activity goes on or down, what are the things that we can do to do better and have more active employees. Also looking into that, who are the ones, and we also measure who would like to take the next steps from just the typical advocacy. Driving traffic to Ericsson.com is also another KPI that we measure, and also the engagement rate. So we encourage everyone that instead of spamming their networks, we have a lot of people, 100,000 employees. So we have all types of behavior that you can imagine. And I think that's just in people, the more people that love big numbers. And we just have to cater for that. But try to think that how can they rewrite some of the copy that is really engaging for their employees. And then we also have specific measurements around that these are the key topics that we want to be part of the conversations. And we measure our employees who are experts and we have been coaching. Are they connected to the influencer community? So we can see if the influencer community around those topics have been mentioning them, and some of them are not replying. So we can follow up with them that, okay, you see that they are talking to you and you are not. And that sounds natural environment that you are just broadcasting. People are talking to you at a networking event and you don't listen and talk back or talk to them, but you're just broadcasting and keep saying your own thing. So how can we change that? Really look at that and measure that. Are we being part of those discussions? So those are the key elements that we see and measure.
All right, great. Thank you. I know that's going to be valuable for a lot of folks because proving the effectiveness of it and proving the effectiveness of anything I think marketers do is a must. And for some can be a challenge, and especially in an area like employee advocacy that's still picking up steam as a strategy, as an approach. How we measure and what we use to measure, I think is great. Great to know and understand. And as I say that it's picking up steam, I think more and more companies are jumping on board. But from your perspective, Anita, doing this for as many years as you have been with Ericsson, what do you think needs to happen for employee advocacy to really take root as an approach in more companies across the world?
That's a really great question. I think, first of all, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, that we cannot control everything. Be comfortable that sometimes employees will not stay on the corporate messaging. And is that bad? Not necessarily, because internally, usually the marketing messages that are approved and are corporate, they represent the brand 100%, but sometimes they are boring. They are inside out and not outside in, and use a specific language. Employees, even if it's not 100%, maybe they are able to better convey the message and the essence of it rather than staying on 100% branded messages. I think it's also the evolution of leaders and understanding of social, that what it is, it's not just channels. Social media is so much more. And our employees have really that power to support the business, but also to thrive and share their experience and how their brand also builds the companies. So I think it's really the new type of leadership that is really required within these companies, to embrace social instead of trying to control it. Because people will share and you cannot really control. I mean, we see now that companies also need to adapt to new hybrid models, that people are leaving different companies whenever they wanted them to go back to the office 100%. People are having more and more power and saying. I mean, we have seen Netflix employees just walking out on the street because they didn't agree with a comment. So I think companies really need to think through how they work with employees and how to embrace social.
And it's a charge to leadership. It's a charge. I'm hearing that very clearly. It's a call to leadership to see it differently. And as you said, we can't control what people say, choose to do. And I think it's a timely word. Well, Anita, thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I usually try and keep my conversations at about 30-35 minutes, but so many great nuggets. And I so appreciate your taking the time to share your very valuable experience, which I know has benefited a lot of our listeners at this point. And I always like to end by asking my awesome guests, how can we, the internal marketing tribe, support you, Anita?
I love that question. I think it's connecting with me. So please connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter. I would love to hear other stories, either in social media, employee advocacy, and in marketing. You work with internal marketing. How can we learn from each other? So for me, that is usually the best benefit to meeting new people, getting new perspectives from us, just like our story with you, Kerry-Ann. I'm so grateful for our networking opportunities and also co-creating content. And I get so inspired by you and so many others. So that would be the biggest support for me.
Thank you. And yes, folks, follow her, connect with her. Awesome content, awesome learning. And again, Anita, thank you so very much for taking the time to share with us. And we wish you and yours and the Ericsson family continued success in all of your endeavors. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. It was so much fun, and thank you so much for having me.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope that you've gotten some valuable takeaways from today's discussion. And if you found it valuable, then please, I invite you as always to share it with someone who you believe will find it valuable as well. If you're not already subscribed to the Internal Marketing Podcast, please join the family. The podcast is available on your favorite podcasting app. Thank you again for listening. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.